Sir, we need to see some ID. For what? I haven't done anything. Just cooperate, it'll be quick. This is harassment.
The gas pump clicked to a stop at $47.83. Solomon returned the nozzle to its cradle and reached for his wallet. April 4th, 7:15 a.m. Sunoco Station, Office R95, Woodbridge, Virginia. He had been thinking about his mother the entire drive, about the safety locks he installed on her doors over the weekend, about how she called him by his father's name twice and didn't notice. Early-stage dementia, the doctor said. Like that made it easier. A white Ford Explorer swung into the station and stopped directly behind his vehicle, blocking him in. Two men stepped out before the engine died. Tactical vests, holstered weapons. 3 letters stamped across their chests. ICE. The taller one approached first. Late 40s, face carved from years of suspicion. He didn't introduce himself, didn't offer a greeting. Just stopped 3 feet from Solomon and spoke 2 words like they were a verdict. Papers. Documentation. Solomon turned slowly. 15 years of FBI training kicked in before anything else could. Read the situation. Assess the threat. Control your response. His hands stayed visible at his sides. Documentation for what? Proof of citizenship. Proof you belong here. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. We share stories of courage, injustice, and what happens when authority meets accountability. If that's something you need, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happens next at this gas station will stay with you forever. Solomon kept his voice level, calm, professional, the same tone he used when briefing senators on classified operations. I'm a federal agent, FBI. My credentials are in my jacket pocket. The agent's lip curled into something between a smile and a sneer. Sure you are. And I'm the Easter Bunny. He stepped closer. Too close. Hands on the vehicle. Now. 3 cameras were recording. The gas station's CCTV mounted above the entrance. The body camera clipped to the agent's vest, and the dash cam of a Virginia state trooper who had just pulled in for coffee and was watching the scene unfold from his cruiser. Solomon placed his palms on the hood of his own car. The metal was cool against his skin. He had stood in rooms with terrorists who wanted him dead. He had worked undercover operations where one wrong word meant a bullet. He had survived things this agent couldn't imagine. He would survive this too. The agent's partner hung back near the Explorer. Younger. Nervous. His hand rested on his belt, but his eyes kept darting between Solomon and the growing audience of gas station customers who had stopped to watch. The lead agent patted Solomon down, removed his wallet, removed his phone, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out the leather case containing his FBI credentials. He flipped it open, studied it for 3 seconds and laughed. Actually laughed. These are fake. I've seen better forgeries from teenagers. Call the FBI field office. They'll verify everything. I'll decide what I call and when I call it. The man standing with his hands on that vehicle wasn't undocumented, wasn't a criminal, wasn't suspicious. He was Special Agent Solomon Okonkwo, FBI Counterintelligence Division. 15 years of service protecting this country from threats most Americans would never know existed. A security clearance higher than most members of Congress. Personal commendation from the Attorney General. And for the next 31 minutes, he would be treated like a suspect in his own country. Agent Garrett Hensley had conducted 312 stops just like this one. 84% of his targets were black or Latino. 91% were American citizens with every right to be exactly where they stood. He had never faced consequences, never been disciplined, never been told to stop. But this time, he picked the wrong man at the wrong gas station on the wrong morning, and that man was already planning exactly how to make him pay. What would you do if a federal agent demanded you prove you belonged in your own country? Rain dripped through the ceiling of the shotgun house on Dauphine Street. 9-year-old Solomon placed a pot beneath the leak and listened to the ping of water hitting metal. His mother was on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice sounded wrong, broken in places it had never broken before. His father wasn't coming home. Kwame Okonkwo had died on a job site in Metairie. Heat stroke. He had been repairing an air conditioning unit on the roof of a warehouse while the Louisiana sun cooked everything it touched. The foreman found him collapsed beside his toolbox at 2:47 p.m. No workers' compensation. The company claimed he was an independent contractor, No lawsuit. The family couldn't afford a lawyer. Just a funeral bill that Guerline Okonkwo would spend the next 3 years paying off in installments of $25 a month. Solomon watched them lower his father into the ground at St. Louis Cemetery. Watched his mother stand perfectly still while other women wailed around her. Watched her walk back to the car without crying, because crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. That night, she sat on the edge of his bed and held his face in her hands. Her eyes were dry, but something behind them had changed forever. This country will try to tell you what you are, Solomon. You tell it what you're going to become. She said those words every morning after that, while ironing his school uniform, while counting coins for lunch money, while working double shifts at the hotel on Canal Street, and coming home with hands cracked from bleach and chemicals. Guerline had arrived from Haiti at 19 with nothing but a cousin's address and a willingness to work until her body gave out. She cleaned hotel rooms for 23 years, made beds for tourists who never looked her in the eye, scrubbed toilets for businessmen who left tips smaller than their contempt. But her son would not clean rooms. Her son would not die on a rooftop in the heat. Her son would become something this country could not ignore. Solomon listened. Solomon believed. Solomon became Frederick Douglass High School, valedictorian, full scholarship to Xavier University, Tulane Law School, where professors told him he was destined for a courtroom, partnership at a major firm, wealth, prestige, everything America promised to those who worked hard enough. He wanted something different. He wanted the streets, the same streets that had swallowed so many boys who looked like him, the same streets where his father's friends had disappeared into prison cells and early graves. He didn't want to defend people after the damage was done. He wanted to stop the damage before it started. FBI Academy at Quantico. 28 years old. The only black man in his training class. He graduated 3rd overall and 1st in firearms qualification. Organized crime division took him first. Then counterintelligence came calling. 15 years of service. Operations he couldn't discuss with anyone, including his own mother. Foreign operatives attempting to infiltrate American infrastructure. Cases that required clearances most politicians couldn't obtain. Briefings with senators who shook his hand and thanked him for his service. A personal commendation from the Attorney General, framed on his mother's wall next to his father's funeral program. Solomon had given everything to a country that still couldn't decide if he belonged. He visited his mother every month, drove down from D.C. to Richmond, where he had moved her after the 9th Ward never fully recovered from Katrina. She was 74 now. The dementia had started small, forgetting where she put her keys, calling him by his brother's name, then by his father's name, then asking who he was before the recognition flooded back into her eyes. He spent that weekend installing safety locks on her doors, convincing her to accept a part-time caregiver, watching her forget him and remember him and forget him again. He was exhausted when he left, heartbroken, barely holding himself together as he drove north on I-95, thinking about mortality and memory and all the things we lose before we're ready. He stopped for gas at a Sunoco station in Woodbridge because the tank was almost empty. And a man named Garrett Hensley decided that none of that mattered. To Hensley, Solomon wasn't an agent, wasn't a son, wasn't a man who had spent his life serving a country that kept questioning his loyalty. He was just another African who needed to prove he belonged. Hensley had no idea who he was dealing with. But standing at that gas pump, hands on his own vehicle, Solomon was already thinking like the FBI agent he had been for 15 years. Document everything. Build the case. Destroy the man who thinks he's untouchable. How does it feel to sacrifice everything for a country that still treats you like a suspect? Garrett Hensley grew up in a house where the television was always angry. Talk radio in the kitchen. News channels in the living room. His grandfather complaining about the chemical plant that automated away his job. His father complaining about the mines that closed and never reopened. Parkersburg, West Virginia taught its children a specific kind of hunger, not for food, for someone to blame. Garrett couldn't name what had been stolen from him, couldn't explain the hollow feeling that followed him through high school, through 2 semesters of community college he dropped out of, through a string of jobs that led nowhere. He just knew that someone somewhere had taken something that should have been his. He found ICE in 2012, found purpose, found power, found a uniform that made people look at him the way nobody had ever looked at him before, with fear. 13 years on the job had crystallized his worldview into something simple. There were Americans, and there were invaders, and he could always tell the difference. The way they talked, and the way they moved, the way they looked at him when he approached. He had a gift for spotting people who didn't belong. His colleagues had a nickname for him, Papers, because that was always his first word. Not hello, not good morning, not can I help you, just Papers, said like an accusation, said like the verdict had already been decided before the conversation began. 312 citizenship verification stops in 4 years. 84% targeted Black or Latino individuals. His success rate for actual immigration violations was 9%. 9%, meaning 91% of the people he stopped were American citizens with every legal right to be exactly where they stood. Any legitimate law enforcement agency would have pulled his badge years ago, but Hensley's supervisors measured success in activity, and not accuracy. Stops conducted, forms filed, the appearance of vigilance. 17 complaints sat in his personnel file. Different names, different dates, same pattern. A Salvadoran grandmother detained for 45 minutes outside her church on Easter Sunday, while her grandchildren waited inside wondering where she was. A Puerto Rican veteran questioned at his daughter's soccer game, humiliated in front of other parents who never looked at him the same way again. A Nigerian doctor stopped in the parking lot of the hospital where he had worked for 11 years, his white coat ignored, his credentials dismissed as probably fake. Each complaint was filed. Each complaint was reviewed. Each complaint was dismissed due to insufficient evidence of wrongdoing. One internal memo did flag his behavior. A supervisor named Pauline Schaefer wrote 6 words that should have ended his career. Agent Hensley's pattern-based approach creates significant liability. Recommend reassignment. The memo was filed. The reassignment never happened. Hensley kept hunting. What his supervisors never saw lived in his phone. Group texts with 3 other agents who shared his worldview. Jokes about suspects. Complaints about these people. A digital record of exactly who Garrett Hensley was when he thought no one was watching. April 4th started like any other shift. He was driving on I-95 when he spotted the black man at the gas pump. Nice car, well-dressed. Something about him seemed off. Hensley couldn't explain what off meant. He just felt it. The same instinct that had guided 312 previous stops. The same gut feeling that had never once been questioned by anyone with the power to stop him. He pulled into the station and blocked the man's vehicle. Standard approach. Establish control immediately. Don't give them time to think. Papers. Documentation. The man turned slowly. Too slowly. Calm in a way that felt like resistance. Hensley's suspicion doubled. Innocent people acted nervous. Guilty people acted calm. He had learned that on the job and never questioned whether it was true. I'm a federal agent, FBI. My credentials are in my jacket pocket. Hensley almost laughed. Almost. He had heard every excuse in the book. Doctor, lawyer, businessman. They all had stories. They all had fake IDs that looked almost real. This one was just more creative than most. Hands on the vehicle. He patted the man down, found the FBI credentials, and examined them for 3 seconds and decided they were forgeries. They had to be, because the alternative meant Hensley had made a mistake, and Garrett Hensley did not make mistakes. His partner Boyd stood near the Explorer looking uncomfortable. A few customers had stopped to watch. Someone had a phone out. None of that mattered. Hensley had done this hundreds of times. The audience always dispersed. The complaints always disappeared. The system always protected him. But Solomon Okonkwo wasn't like the others. He wasn't going to file a complaint that would get lost in bureaucracy. He wasn't going to go home and try to forget what happened. He was standing at that pump with his hands on his vehicle, memorizing every detail. The timestamps, the badge numbers, the exact words Hensley used. I'm building a case in real time the way he had built cases against foreign operatives for 15 years. Garrett Hensley saw a target and saw an easy stop. Solomon Okonkwo saw a defendant and saw the most important case of his career. Only one of them understood what was really happening at Pump 7, and by the time Hensley figured it out, everything he had built would already be burning. Do you think agents like Hensley are exceptions to the system, or exactly what the system was designed to create? Hensley's hands moved across Solomon's body like he was searching for contraband on a street corner. Shoulders, sides, waist, legs. The pat-down was textbook in technique, but the intent was something else entirely. This wasn't a search. This was a performance. The gas station parking lot had become a stage. The customers stood frozen beside their vehicles, watching. A woman with 2 children in her minivan covered their eyes. An elderly man in a pickup truck shook his head slowly, his coffee forgotten in his hand. The Virginia State Trooper sat in his cruiser with the engine running, dashcam recording everything. Solomon kept his palms flat on the hood. The metal had warmed under the morning sun. He focused on his breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The same technique he used during interrogations. The same calm that had kept him alive in rooms with men who would have killed him without hesitation. Hensley pulled the FBI credentials from Solomon's jacket and flipped them open again, studied them like a man looking for flaws in a forgery. His lips moved slightly as he read the name, the title, the badge number that could be verified with a single phone call. "These are fake," he said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "Good quality, but fake. Call the Washington field office. Ask for Assistant Director Thornton. He'll verify. I told you. I decide what I call and when I call it." Agent Boyd Creech stood near the Explorer with his arms crossed. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. 13 months working with Hensley had taught him to recognize the patterns. The targets who trembled, the targets who cried, the targets who begged. This man did none of those things. This man stood with his hands on his vehicle like he was waiting for something, like he knew how this was going to end. "Garrett." Boyd's voice came out smaller than he intended. "Maybe we should make the call." "Shut up, Boyd. I've got this under control." 23 minutes had passed. Solomon counted them in his head. 23 minutes of questions he had already answered. 23 minutes of demands for documents he had already provided. 23 minutes of a man with a badge pretending not to see what was right in front of his face. A woman near the air pump raised her phone to record. Hensley spotted her immediately. "Put that away. This is federal business." She lowered the phone but didn't stop recording. Just held it at her hip, camera pointed toward the scene. Solomon made a mental note. Another witness. Another piece of evidence. Minute 27. Hensley finally reached for his radio. The call went to ICE dispatch first, then to the FBI liaison, then to the Washington field office. Solomon heard fragments of the conversation through the static. His name, his badge number, a request for verification that should have been made before the first papers left Hensley's mouth. The response came quickly. Special Agent Solomon Okonkwo, Counterintelligence Division, 15 years of service, security clearance, top secret with sensitive compartmented information access, currently assigned to a classified joint task force. Then the voice on the other end asked a question that made Hensley's face change color. "Why exactly is one of our agents being detained at a gas station?" Hensley's jaw tightened. His hand gripped the radio so hard his knuckles went white. For the first time in 312 stops, he had nothing to say. 31 minutes. And that's how long it took for Garrett Hensley to admit what Solomon had told him from the beginning. The credentials were real. The badge was real. The man he had humiliated in front of a dozen witnesses was exactly who he said he was. Hensley shoved the credentials back into Solomon's hands. No apology, no acknowledgement, no recognition that he had just treated a federal agent like a criminal for half an hour, based on nothing but the color of his skin. "You're free to go." Solomon took his credentials, put them back in his jacket pocket, straightened his shirt. He didn't move toward his car. Not yet. "Agent Hensley." His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that made people lean in to hear. The kind of quiet that carried more weight than shouting ever could. "You're going to remember this day. I promise you that." Hensley snorted. Dismissive, unimpressed. He had heard threats before. Empty words from angry targets who went home and forgot. But Solomon Okonkwo had spent 15 years building cases against people who thought they were untouchable. He knew how to document evidence. He knew how to find patterns. He knew how to wait. That night, Garrett Hensley sent a text to his group chat. 3 other agents who shared his views. His words would become Exhibit 47A in a federal lawsuit. "Got a live one today? African guy claiming to be FBI. Had fake credentials and everything. These people getting creative." And 20 minutes later, turned out to be real. Whatever. He shouldn't have looked suspicious. 17 words. typed with one thumb, sent without a second thought. Those 17 words would cost him everything. If someone wrongly detained you and then let you go without an apology, would you walk away or would you fight back? The lawsuit landed on the Department of Homeland Security's desk like a grenade. U.S. District Court, Eastern District of Virginia. 4 defendants named in bold black type. Agent Garrett Hensley, Agent Boyd Creech, ICE Field Director Warren Kessler, the Department of Homeland Security. The complaint was 53 pages long, every minute documented, every word catalogued, every violation spelled out in language that left no room for interpretation. Government attorneys reviewed the evidence and immediately requested a settlement conference. They offered $2.1 million. Quiet, confidential, no admission of wrongdoing. Solomon refused. They came back with $4.5 million, sealed records, no press, no trial. He refused again. His attorney, a civil rights litigator named Vivian Adebayo, who had spent 28 years fighting cases most lawyers called impossible, asked him why he kept turning down the money. Because settlement records disappear. Solomon's voice was steady. I want a verdict. I want a number attached to what he did. I want every agent who thinks about doing this to know exactly what it will cost them. Discovery began 2 months later. What it uncovered made national news for 3 weeks straight. 312 citizenship verification stops in 4 years. 84% targeting Black or Latino individuals. 91% false positives. American citizens stopped, searched, and humiliated for no reason other than the color of their skin. 17 complaints in Hensley's personnel file. Each one dismissed. Each one buried. Each one a warning that nobody heeded. Internal memos showed supervisors had flagged his behavior multiple times. Pauline Schaefer's 6-word recommendation sat in his file like an accusation. Pattern-based approach creates significant liability. Recommend reassignment. The reassignment never happened. The hunting never stopped. But the most devastating evidence came from Hensley's personal phone. Group texts with 3 other agents. Messages sent the night of April 4th. Got a live one today. African guy claiming to be FBI. Had fake credentials and everything. These people getting creative. And later, turned out to be real. Whatever. He shouldn't have looked suspicious. The messages were projected on a courtroom screen while the jury watched. To 17 words that revealed exactly who Garrett Hensley was when he thought nobody was looking. The trial lasted 6 days. The jury consisted of 9 women and 3 men from Northern Virginia, a retired Marine, a public school teacher, an immigrant from El Salvador who had become a U.S. citizen in 2019, 12 Americans who would decide what 31 minutes of humiliation was worth. When Solomon took the stand, the defense attorney tried to minimize what happened. Agent Okonkwo, you were detained for approximately 30 minutes. You were never harmed, never arrested, never charged. Isn't this lawsuit simply an overreaction to an inconvenience? Solomon leaned forward. His voice filled the courtroom without rising. I have spent 15 years protecting this country from threats that most Americans will never know existed. I have missed holidays. I have sacrificed relationships. I have given pieces of myself that I will never get back, all to keep this nation safe. He paused. The jury watched. And on April 4th, I stood in a gas station parking lot while a man with a badge told me I didn't belong, told me my credentials were fake, told me without saying the words that my black skin made me suspicious, made me a target, made me less than American. His eyes found the jury. 30 minutes. You're right. But those 30 minutes told me something I've tried to forget my entire career. That no matter what I achieve, no matter what I sacrifice, no matter how many times I prove my loyalty, there will always be men like Garrett Hensley who see my face before they see my badge. The courtroom was silent. That's not an inconvenience, counselor. That's an indictment of him, of the system that protected him, and of a country that still can't decide if people who look like me belong here. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. $11.7 million, $4.8 million in compensatory damages, $5.9 million in punitive damages, $1 million to establish a civil rights training program for federal immigration officers. Agent Garrett Hensley was terminated. His pension was revoked. Federal prosecutors opened an investigation into his conduct, spanning 4 years of documented abuse. Agent Boyd Creech resigned 2 weeks after the verdict. He issued a public apology and agreed to testify against his former partner in the ongoing investigation. Field Director Warren Kessler was forced into early retirement. His legacy reduced to a single line in news articles: "The man who let it happen." 6 months after the verdict, Solomon Okonkwo was promoted to Supervisory Special Agent. His new assignment: overseeing civil rights compliance within joint federal task forces. He would spend the rest of his career making sure what happened to him never happened to another agent. But he didn't celebrate the promotion. He drove to Richmond instead, pulled into his mother's driveway as the sun began to set, found her sitting on the porch in the rocking chair his father had built 35 years ago. Gurleen looked up when he approached. Her eyes were clear today. She knew exactly who he was. "You won." Her voice carried the accent of Haiti and the weight of 74 years. Solomon sat down beside her. "We won, Mama. Everyone who comes after me. They won too." She reached over and squeezed his hand. Her skin was thin now, fragile in a way that reminded him how much time had passed, how much she had sacrificed, how many hotel rooms she had cleaned so he could stand in courtrooms and demand justice. "Your father would be proud." She paused. "I'm proud." Solomon didn't cry often. He had trained himself not to. The job required compartmentalization, distance, control. But that evening, watching the sun sink below the tree line while his mother held his hand, he allowed himself a few tears. Not for the money, not for the verdict, not even for himself. For every black man who had been stopped, questioned, and humiliated without the credentials to fight back. For every father who died on a job site without justice. For every mother who scrubbed hotel toilets so her children could have something better. For the boy in the shotgun house on Dauphine Street who listened to rain drip through the ceiling and decided he would become something this country could not ignore. This country had tried to tell him what he was. He told it what he became. A badge should mean protection. A uniform should mean service. But for too many Americans, these symbols have become threats. Tools of humiliation wielded by men who confuse authority with supremacy. Solomon Okonkwo wore his badge with honor. Garrett Hensley wore his like a weapon. The difference cost $11.7 million, and a career that should have ended 312 stops ago. Justice doesn't always come quickly. Sometimes it takes lawsuits and jury verdicts and national headlines. But it comes, and when it does, it reminds us of a simple truth. The uniform doesn't make the man. The man makes the uniform. Solomon proved that on the witness stand. Garrett proved it in his text messages, and 12 ordinary Americans understood the difference. That's not just a verdict. That's accountability. That's change. That's what happens when one person refuses to stay silent. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another video. We share stories like this every single week. Stories of courage, stories of justice, stories of ordinary people who refused to accept that things had to stay the way they were. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in your own country? Share your experience. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you know someone who needs this message, share this video. Justice doesn't spread itself. People do. Until next time, carry yourself with dignity, document everything, and never forget that your voice is the most powerful weapon you own. Solomon's mother spent 23 years cleaning hotel rooms so her son could clean house on men like Garrett Hensley. That's legacy. That's love. That's what happens when sacrifice meets opportunity. And somewhere in Richmond, on a porch built by hands that never got to see what they made possible, a mother and son watch the sunset together. That's not a settlement. That's victory.